Sadness, it overwhelms. Pain breaks loose, your heart-stopping wails, gut-wrenching sobs, heartbreaking tears that streak across one's cheeks. This is Lamentations. It's an expression of profound grief and sorrow. It's weeping. It's gnashing of teeth. It comes from the Latin lamenta, which means to weep or to wail. Lamentations means more than just shedding a few tears. Lamentations is when grief just pours out of every part of our being. There are seasons in life. There are seasons of new birth, and then there are seasons of death. There are seasons of great joy. There are seasons of passion, of sadness. There are seasons of life that you are just so passionate, and then there are seasons in which you are detached. And some of them happen almost simultaneous. That the moments of saying goodbye are often accompanied by new opportunities and beginnings. That the moments of death are also happening at the same moments of new life. And for us as a congregation, that has been very much this past week. As we mourned the death of Jeff, and then the news of Karen Snyder's husband, Jim, passing away, we celebrated the birth of Heidi having birth to her new son, Leland, this week. I thought, it is important for us not to always just to put on a happy face despite what situations we're in. But sometimes life is tough, and sometimes it's really tough. And that is when we need to know that it is okay to lament. We lament, we have sadness because we haven't made it to heaven yet. Anyone who's gone through the death of a loved one or maybe a major transition knows that you can be absolutely consumed with sadness. Over the course of a lifetime, it is impossible to not experience some kind of loss. Losses enter our lives in many different ways. It might be the deep pain of death. Or maybe the ending of a relationship, or the termination of jobs. Sometimes it's the goodbyes that are just so devastating. We grieve, we lament. To lament is where our sadness, our emotions, meet the world's deepest wounds. Because sometimes the best thing we can do with someone is to cry with them. And that is absolutely what so much of the book of Psalms is about. Actually, 1/3 of the 150 Psalms that David wrote are actually Psalms of lament. They give an expression, they give us words, they give us a construct to begin to express the sense of sadness and loss that is common to all of humanity. That it wasn't something that ended in the ancient world, but it has continued through to modernity. Lamenting in the Bible probes at the dark places of the human suffering. It looks at the depths of despair. It looks beyond loss and looks at the things that drive our sadness. Possibly guilt, shame, anger, violence. It also names the fact that in our moments of deep sadness, we also question the silence of God. Songwriter Michael Card explained lament in this way. It seems to me that we do not need to be taught how to lament, since we have so many models of it in Scripture. What we need is the simple assurance that it is okay to lament. We carry within ourselves a deep, pressurized reservoir of tears, and it takes only the right key and the right time to unlock them. In God's perfect time, these tears can be released, and what they do is form a healing flood. And that's the beauty and the mystery of the prayer of lament. That deep reservoir of tears that is held within our heart. Lament opens us up, but also what it does is it makes us vulnerable. It makes us vulnerable before one another as well as before God. It is also the ultimate expression of our reliance on someone beyond ourselves. Because in deep lament, we can no longer depend on our own strength. We require God to journey alongside us. However, in our modern society, we want to push off lament. We want to pretend that it doesn't happen. We feel really uncomfortable about it. Lament is natural. However, we want to make sadness polite. I grew up in an Italian family, and Italians are highly emotional people generally. When they laugh and play, they do that hard, and when they weep and they cry and they mourn, they do that with the same degree of passion. I remember that my mom, for the first time, took us to a funeral of someone we didn't know. She said she wanted us to be prepared for what happens. She took us to a funeral of a nun who had very polite mourners at her funeral. And so, even though it was good to have gone to a funeral once and maybe know what to expect, we did not accept or understand or know why when the next funeral we went to, there was such loud sobs. There was crying out to God. There were people that were just holding on to their loved one. It was lament at its rawest moment. And so much did we want to go back to the polite service, kind of like the golf clap of tears. You know, but lament gets a bad name because often we confuse it with overly dramatic grumbling or chronic complaining. Yes? That sometimes it is the petulant whiners in our society that are all around us that make lamenting seem toxic. But lament is not grumbling, which is selfish and impatient and pointless. Scriptures actually encourage us to lament, to give voice to our pain and our suffering. And it tells us instead that we need to keep our grumbling under control. The Bible tells us that we need to be honest about our emotions, to laugh fully, but to cry with the same degree of passion. And it invites others to come into our pain, to not suffer alone in silence, but instead ask others to come and join us in our moments of grief. Now, honestly, no church sets out to begin to have a bad attitude about lamenting, however it happens. The American church has too often misunderstood the value of public grief and private lament. We brush away pain. We wipe away our tears so no one will see them. We do not want weeping and wailing. And so instead, we offer words to stop all the noise. All things will come together for good, we tell them. For the Lord never gives you more than you can handle. Or even we try to convince ourselves when it is us that is going through the pain that it isn't such a big deal. It's not because we're bad people. But we don't know how to really allow spaces and time for people to actually have deep encounters. Instead, what we want to do is move past our pain quickly so we can move on to the next thing. And if the church is not willing to open ourselves up to the raw emotions of lamentation, then where will people go? Where will they be free to express their pain and their grief? Where can we open up our hearts and our minds and our doors for people who are in pain, so they know that they do not need to suffer in silence? I believe that we need to be able to get beyond the polite and instead be open to the uncomfortable possibility that when people share their grief, it isn't pretty. But know that a heartfelt hug and a quiet hand held is often all that is needed. The holy reaction to feeling sad is not to ignore it, or to bury it, or to push it down. It's not about pretending that it isn't there. That isn't the healthy response. But the healthy response isn't something like a quick fix either. It's a journey. It's part of life, and it will come alongside the laughter. It'll come alongside the imagining and the dreaming, and it'll be intercepted by moments of sadness, grief, tears, laments. To lament is to cry out to God with our doubts, because that's exactly what David did in the Psalms. Is he didn't say, I know exactly what you're doing right now, God. Instead, he asked, why? Where? How come? Sometimes our laments come out like blame to God and blame to others, and to move through that, we sometimes need to have the freedom to offer those words. Oh, how long, God? Or where are you in my misery? Or why do you let my enemies triumph? These are all cries of lament that we find from the Bible, and it is in the midst of genuine faith that we find these questions. Because people are expecting and wanting something better than what they have at the moment from God. Despair at the loss of a loved one, despair in moments of deep pain. And I know that a lot of you right now are suffering deep physical pain. It isn't pretending that everything is okay, but instead, it opens us up to be able to question, Because questions do not break down our faith, but instead they open us up for the work of God in our midst. And so it is all right to take these psalms of lament, or even your own words, or even your lack of words, and just your groans and tears, and question God. In our Christian walk, there are many different ways in which we can lament. And one of them is song. Actually, the Psalms which we read today are actually meant to be sung. Because I didn't give Ben enough time, otherwise he would have sang them for me. Yeah, next time you can sing them. But actually, they are meant to be sung. They're meant to be sung accompanied by beautiful instruments. And songs of pain and sadness are found in the Bible. And it isn't to prolong someone's sadness, but it's not about self-pity. It's not about being tearfully sentimental. But instead, they were designed to be powerful tools to help people express sadness and to rebuild their confidence in Yahweh. As they question, as they ask, the songs move them into reminders that God is ever present, especially in the midst of tears. Another way that we lament is through prayer. And we'll explicitly spend a whole sermon talking about how we can pray intentionally. Pray in and through and with our tears. But actually, a kind of a prayer is tears and weeping. Lamenting is about letting it go. Because tears speak more about our hearts, and they feel more than any words could ever express. Tears actually carry our deepest emotions from our heart, and we allow the world in that way to see our pain. As those tiny kind of salty drops tumble down from our eyes and creep down our cheeks, they carry the message of heartbreak, hurt. But they also carry a hope for release and renewal. Tears are often messengers for a lack of words. When we don't know exactly what to speak, they carry our deepest emotions from our heart to the world. A tear falling on a casket says a lot more often than the best eulogy. I ask you, what moves us to compassion and concern more quickly than the tears of a child? All of you just turned around. You can't tell me. You just looked when I was crying. You were like, and it wasn't like, oh, what is he doing? You were like, oh. It breaks our heart. It actually, though, it warms our heart because it reminds us that just as his father scooped him up to care for him, that our God is there to scoop us up and care for each of us. What gives more support than a conversation when we are sharing a deep, profound moment with someone and we see that it has moved them to tears? Tears are a messenger of pain, of sorrow, of fear, of shame, of grief, and even anger. Washington Irving said that there is a sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are messengers of overwhelming grief, a deep contrition of an unspeakable love. It is when you love enough to cry that you are deeply moved and touched. And the Bible is absolutely soaked in tears. There are prophets that weep, there are priests, there are disciples, and Jesus himself, as Judy said, cries. Tears are not meant to trip us up or cause us shame, and our tears are not simply to lament things that have passed, but they are to get us through the moments in the present, and they are to move us into the future. They're expressions of our longing for something yet to come. Tears are less about what we can do and more about what God will do. And so in these days in which you call out, and maybe you're not in that season right now, maybe you're not in a season of lament, but I ask you to, if you're not, just allow this to soak in, because at some point you are going to need this. Allow yourself to call out, to question, and to even rant. And allow God to provide you the tears to open up your hearts to God's presence, because your tears matter to God. And they matter to all of us who are gathered here. And so just as we came together and cried along with Scott and Paige and Chris and Leo, as we will come together tomorrow at the funeral and cry alongside Karen, as we'll cry alongside each of you when you have moments of loss, I invite you to let go of your reaction to stop the tears, but instead let them flow. Will you pray with me, please? Amazing God, it is in our groans, in our wails, in our tears, it is in our rants, it is in our questions that we cry out. Lament for so many things in this world. And we ask you, Lord, to be present with us, to give us a hand to hold, give us a shoulder to lean on,